Welcome to Interview with the Masters, brought to you by CGMA, the CG Master Academy. I'm your host, Ben Scott. Our guest today is Maciej Kuciara, concept artist at Naughty Dog. Before we begin, a reminder that registration for CGMA courses is currently open. Visit cgma2dacademy.com to view current course offerings and sign up for the class or classes that best fit your needs. Interview with the Masters is an ongoing series. Keep an eye on our website for more information. For everyone who is joining us today, if you have any questions for Maciej, you'll see in your GoToWebinar control panel a small box titled Questions. Kindly send your questions through the control panel, and we will attempt to answer as many questions as possible. Maciej, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, how are you guys?
I'm sure everyone is doing quite well and is very excited to have the opportunity to discuss some of your work. I'd like to take a few minutes to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself and what you do.
Sure. Hey, you guys. I'm Maciej. I'm a concept artist working for video games and film. I currently work at Naughty Dog full-time. We just briefly just finished working on The Last of Us. I hope you guys already played it. I live in California, Santa Monica. Yeah, what else? I guess that's it.
So you work as a concept artist now. What was your start in the entertainment industry?
It was rough, if you ask me. So I wasn't planning actually to start, but I wasn't actually planning to be an artist to begin with. Since I was a kid, I was like drawing pictures and being all silly, and it all started for me around 2003 actually, when I saw Thomas Baginski's work, The Cathedral, which was nominated to Academy Award for short animation. And that was like the moment where like look at that stuff and like, oh my god, this is like computer graphics and this is done by a human being. So maybe I might try to do that as well. So I started playing around with 3D first, 3ds Max, and just fooling around with it, trying to create some models. And I quickly realized that I can switch over to 2D and actually draw pictures and enjoy it a little more than actual 3D. And stumbled upon a couple of forums where I saw other artists doing work. Then I saw Craig Mullins doing work on the CGN forums and other guys, and I was like, yeah, that's it. That's what I'm gonna do. So shortly after, I was in 2004. I was still not like focused on actually becoming an artist because I was attending like a technical university to become an electrician. But I was like every time I was going back from university, I spent almost every hour of my free time painting. So I was doing that for like about a year, and then I got my first job offer, which was a small German company that was doing a board game. And then I realized, like, yeah, actually, you can make money out of that. So I followed that road. In late 2004, through my friend, CEO of People Can Fly, saw some of my work and got offered there, and I guess that's how it all started.
Now, from the beginning, have you done all of your work digitally, or did you begin with traditional work at all?
So until I got my first tablet, I was drawing just on paper. But once I saw that, like once 2003, when I saw The Cathedral, I knew, okay, I need to have something to work with. So I bought my first pentagram tablet, which was like the cheap version of Wacom with the battery inside the pin, and just started playing with Photoshop at that moment. So from the very beginning of the actual progression to get into the industry, I was working in digital.
Now, you said you started at a small German company, and now you find yourself working on one of the biggest video game hits of all time with The Last of Us. What was it like going through that progression, starting out at a small company and moving up to something so incredible as this most recent project?
Oh, it was tense. You know how it is. It's just a lot of work that you have to put to get there. Like I know a lot of friends, like a lot of friends of mine that work in the industry are workaholics. They just spend every single hour in just doing work and practicing. Yeah, so it's just it was just like that. Like I was working for someone and doing my hours, and then after that I was working for myself, doing my own work. So the more practice you get, the better you get. I guess that applies to almost every single job. And yeah, that's how it was working for me.
Now, I've really enjoyed seeing a lot of your concept pieces from The Last of Us, and I know you have a few that you've prepared to share with us today. I'd love to hear
Yeah.
a little bit of your approach on some of them and some of your favorites.
Sure. All right, so let's start. This piece here, that's a concept I did for the VGA 2011 trailer.
Mhm.
That's the ending corridor when the Ellie and Joel are running out from the hotel, running away from the infected. So yeah, it usually, like this kind of concept, that was starting from just the discussion of what's the trailer about, and then we had to do some storyboards and black and white sketches. Unfortunately, I don't have those right now. But if you think about this image, the process was to get as close to a realistic look as possible. So at the moment when we decided, okay, we kind of want to go with this ambiguous lighting where the light is coming from the door, from the doors on the side, and the characters running through them are going to be like constantly flashing between being in shade and being in the light. And once we kind of like understood where we want to go with this, it was just an unusual process for me, which was collecting a lot of references, and combining them as photo textures and then painting over to make a concept out of it. We actually, before we started work on The Last of Us, me and my friend Shadi Safari, we went to downtown LA and some parts of East LA to actually take photos of collapsing stuff, skid rows, and all this nasty areas of Los Angeles to get as much reference that would get us close to this post-apocalyptic look, which frankly you can find places in Los Angeles that look similar to those. So that's one of the pieces. This is a mild spoiler. It's the winter level. This piece, together with a couple of other concepts I'm going to show, were more like conversation starters. I was working mainly with Bruce Straley and Neil Druckmann to create like a visual language for the game. When we were starting doing concept work for The Last of Us, we wanted, like, the first thing first, we wanted to get away from Uncharted look. Like, we don't want to make it look like Uncharted, which is very colorful, cartoony to some degree, and more like a Disney kind of movie rather than a gritty work like The Road, for example. So I was approaching each of the concepts with the goal of realism, grittiness, and intense action or emotions. So yeah, so like for example, this concept, this is a 3D paint over. I've made like the bridge model in Maya, and you can see actually some of the 3D here in this area that's not overpainted. I missed that. And then from there, it was just collecting proper references, and then just scattering a good photography across the image, and then painting, making it seamless. That's the same situation here. That's a winter map as well. This one was more, actually this piece was more painted than photographed. You can see some of the brush strokes, especially on the trees and vines. But like again, like all of the work that I was focusing on was to get the lighting and start a lot of conversations. So for example, once we had a couple of concepts, I'll try to find, we'll scroll to like that one, and there was one more just looking to scroll. Where is it? Here? Probably here. That piece. That's a perfect example of how we started thinking about our game. This concept was broke down into several passes, and we tried to do the same thing with the actual game. When I was talking to Bruce, how to make the game more realistic and how to improve on the engine's lighting and all that, we were always referring to concept art. So for example, before we had this final piece here, we had a black and white version of the same image with without all the details like distress and graffitis and all that. Just shapes and values, just to start the conversation on how to block the colors on the map and how to block the values so that when you traverse through the world, it's nicely detailed, but it also reads well, and it's not like a one big noise in the background. Then once we had that nailed down, we did like a lighting pass before adding all these details, and we started a conversation on how to improve the engine, on how getting the realistic lighting in the game. And that is just it's just the usual concept art business where you just try to add a lot of those small details like posters and trash like here, or reflections on the ground with a lot of water and dirt and trash. So yeah,
what I've noticed
similar.
What I've noticed in listening to you discuss these pieces is that you're not afraid to pull a 3D model, to pull a photo texture, and to also bring in your painting on top of that. Mm-hmm. How do you approach bringing together all these different elements and using them as tools for your work?
Well, first of all, I think any tool that will get you to an end result, which is the concept art or the actual game, is good. There's no tool that is like you shouldn't use because of the moral or whatever reasons. Since I started painting in Photoshop, I found that using photos just makes my work faster, and then I started to actually learn how to use them wisely and how to take knowledge out of the photos I look at or I use in my paintings. Because no matter how awesome painter you are, unless you're Michelangelo or Da Vinci or Caravaggio, you're not gonna get to a level of realism without looking into some kind of reference. And I would have to spend countless hours to get, for example, this image we look at right now. It would just take me forever to get it to the detail, to that amount of detail and that accuracy of lighting if I was just to paint it from scratch without, using any textures. And obviously, when you work for entertainment, you know that you only have certain amount of time that you can spend on a particular image because you have to move on because there's so much other work that has to be done. So photography and 3D are those mediums that will just help you to get there faster, right?
Mm-hmm.
In free time, obviously, you can try to replicate this just painting from the scratch and see how far you can go with it. But I mean, for me, it's just like another part of the tool. I don't count. I don't look at the Photoshop anymore as my primary tool because there's so many other things that I'm using to get my concepts done that it's just one of the mediums that will just get me to the final product. I'll try to find a better example of 3D mixed photography and paint, like that one. So this scene, for example, is 50% 3D, 40% texture, and 10% paint. I've built this entire scenery in Maya. I textured it briefly in Maya, just projecting concrete or kind of dirt around just to get a rough representation of the concept, and then used photo textures to get extra details, and then paint just to get those small speckles of dirt on the ground or the blood on the walls, and some more details on the characters. But it's just the easier and faster way to create something, and give this to put this towards the production pipeline, where then our lighting artists can take this piece and like, okay, I can see where the lighting is coming from and how it's bouncing across the ground and across the map, and what kind of saturation and hue the shadow should be and all that. It's way easier to work that way, especially in production, than just relying only on one tool just for the sake of being an awesome artist, I guess.
Now, one of the difficulties that you often see with an artist that's starting out using photo textures, using 3D, and using painting and trying to bring them together is that those three sources can each have a very different initial look to them. Photos can be very noisy, very detailed. 3D work can have somewhat accurate simulation of lighting to even a level of a very accurate simulation of lighting. It can be very smooth depending on the way you work with it. And then with Photoshop and brushes, depending on your approach, it can be very smooth. It can have brush strokes all over it. And yet when I look at your images, in spite of the fact that you're pulling three sources that can look very different, the piece is very unified itself. So what do you do with those three sources to create a unified final look?
Well, despite of all the things I was talking about just a moment ago, obviously, when you draw pictures, when you do it traditionally or in the digital media without using textures and 3D, your hand is learning to do it more accurately and more creatively. Before I learned what Photoshop is, before I got my first tablet, I was drawing images on pen, with pen and paper. So there is a certain amount of skill I got out of it that helped me to get better over time and use the same knowledge, but in the digital world. As a matter of fact, actually, before I started working on Crisis 2, I think, there was barely any work that I was doing that had 3D element in it. Like all of it was either painting or painting with textures. And I guess trying to reach the goal of realism, of accurate lighting, of accurate colors and shapes throughout all those years got me to a point where I felt comfortable adding 3D element to speed up the production pipeline, the production process, sorry. And what I like, if to look at this image, for example, this is not a great example because there's no 3D in here, but just go back to the other one. No. So just looking at this, because I learned so much and I had so much of practice that I felt comfortable of using Photoshop. Just getting this image rendered, putting it in a Photoshop and texturing, that's what's usually a lot of artists could do easily, I guess easily. So you could build a model, you could texture it, and it's somewhat going to look pretty accurate in terms of lighting and color, especially with the 3D programs that we have right now, which is like 3ds Max, Maya, Modo, or like other 3D softwares packed together, like a program, for example, like Keyshot, where you can get nice lighting pretty quickly. So you can get to a certain level of realism, and then in this piece, to get it look like it's more like painted instead of bashed from photos and 3D, I was just, zooming in and cutting corners and using my custom brushes to actually, paint over those elements, smooth the edges, and cover the seams and all that.
Now I see a lot clearly of textures that come from photos, but also textures that appear from the brushes that you use.
Mm-hmm.
I've even noticed some spots where it looks like you intend to do a bit of shorthand with lighting that looks like you use a very simple, maybe even a hard, round, edged Photoshop brush.
Yeah. That's usually the case, like the corners on those cinder blocks here,
Mm-hmm.
like on those barriers, like these areas are painted.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I could spend time in 3D to get all those interesting details and little, chipped corners of those elements, but I felt like there's no need for that where I can actually, paint those areas.
Now, another difficulty, particularly with these pieces, and it sounds like of major importance in The Last of Us, was the lighting and the mood that the lighting and the colors would bring in those scenes. Now, obviously, working with so many different mediums and trying to bring those together, it's often very difficult to unify lighting. What was your approach to the lighting in these images?
Yeah, I always had some point of reference first. I spent quite a lot of time with my camera or on Google just to find interesting lighting scenarios. And then I tried to use whatever I learned from those photos or finds to incorporate in my images. So for me, it's like, for example, painting, like this image has no 3D. It's a mix of paint and photo textures. And for me, composing this image was first looking at it as from the perspective of an airplane, where you look, or a map. Like you look at the map and like, okay, so we have, let me just demonstrate. So we have this building here, one building here, maybe one building here, and here, and something's going on there. And then I'll get a car, all that. And then there's a tree here and a tree here. And I had like a brief idea, like, okay, this is how it's roughly going to look. Now, where's the lighting coming from? And when I was talking to Bruce about when I was starting this image, we discussed multiple lighting scenarios, like it could be an overcast, or maybe it's raining, or maybe it's a day. We decided that it's going to be a late afternoon, evening scenario. So I figured, okay, so let's put a lighting that is interesting, and it's coming from interesting directions. So if I would make a lighting that goes like this, so looking at this image, for example, it would just come from the viewer point. Then everything on this image would look really flat. Like this car would be lit, this car would be lit, and this car would be lit. Maybe you would have some dappled shadows here, depending on what's behind the viewer and what would cast the shadows on the area. But it would just be really boring, like this entire building here. Maybe we would have like a small shadow in that area here, just on the corner of it. But it would be just lit and flat, and we didn't want that. So, and same case here, if I would make the light come from this direction, then everything on this image would be pretty much dark, with just the highlights on top of the cars, like on the car rooftops, and just outlines on the trees, and it will be, again, boring. Usually the best way for me is just to make the light coming from either of the sides, and like on that one, it's just, coming from kind of like this direction. Mm-hmm. So once I had like idea from which direction the light is coming from, then I could start blocking the image. So I would find photos of the cars. I would just populate the environment with those photos. Like nowadays, I would probably just use 3D boxes just to get the right scale and perspective. Mm-hmm. But in the case of that image, I just use photos of broken cars, just populate the area, then use photos of the buildings, just to get to block what is where, and then started painting and using photo textures to get all the greenery and all that, and keeping in mind where is the direction of the sun coming from. So, for example, you have this huge tree on the right side of the image. It's going to cast a lot of shadows, so the middle part of the concept is going to be almost all in shadows, with some dappled light coming through the leaves. Therefore, if you look at this FedEx car, it has some dappled lights on here. Likewise, this car here, and this car here. And there's like a stream of light coming through the trees from the right side on that car in the front. Yeah, so that's the way I would approach it. And then it's just the usual work I do is trying to find a balance between textures and paint.
Now, clearly with these scenes, while the final image looks incredible, the final product is the game itself. Mm-hmm. And they're working to inspire that final product. In a case like this, you have a lighting situation, you have a single view, but in the case of the game itself, it has to be an interactive area where you travel around and see all of this from different angles. What kind of thought do you put into your image so that it will translate into that 3D space and still function as it's intended to?
So yeah, it is true what you're saying, and it is difficult topic to tackle. A concept like this one, the ones I'm showing online, are the conversation starters. Like we create those images to start talking about light, to start talking about textures, to start talking about models, to start talking about technology behind like creation of the trees and how much of that we can actually afford in the game engine. So in that example, PlayStation 3. And once you start talking about this, like we sat down with Bruce and like it would be awesome to have all those nice, foliage around the cars and the shrubs and trees overgrowing the buildings. And then we started building it in 3D in the engine to see how much the game can actually run without choking. And then we quickly realized that it's choking a lot. It just can't handle these things. And that's the moment where like programmers come in and lighters, and we start to discuss what to change in the existing engine to make this game look as close to the concept as possible. And obviously, you will end up somewhere in the middle of the road. Like I mean, it's not PlayStation 4 yet, I guess. So we just had to take some shortcuts, and maybe we ended up with not the exact amount of foliage and grass as we wanted, but it was just close enough to a place where we felt comfortable with how it looked. Now you said something about me creating like this angle of view, and then once you create the environment in the game, you kind of look in the different angles, and things might not look as great anymore. That is true. That's usually the last couple of months of production for the concept team, is where we actually run the game, put up the levels we have, look into corners, and see how we can improve it. That's in terms of details, placement of objects or dirt or grass or everything, or even just lighting. And we just look around and make a screenshot and then just do quick overpaints that would take us maybe an hour or two. But like if I was to show that on my portfolio, people would say like, what the fuck are you showing here? What is this? What is this bullshit? I don't want to look at that. So majority of work actually is just production. It's just grinding through all this, bad looking stuff. And eventually it comes together. Like when I came back on board in March, we're still the team was crunching for quite some time already, but the game didn't look anything like it looks right now, because we're just approaching the moment where all those things that are behind the actual look of the game, which is the lighting, the textures, and like high-res models and all those small things that are laid on the ground and animations and all those things were just coming together. And, it's very stressful towards the end, but it's gratifying when you see all your hard work you put in the game in the final product as an actual interactive medium.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like the way that the artwork was approached on this game was initially images that are kind of a broad stroke of what the intention of the look is, and then as things become more detailed, you go in and you refine little individual pieces so that you can make sure the entire product looks great from high to low, from large piece to small corner.
Yeah. Pretty much. I mean, when we were starting on The Last of Us, we only had like a brief idea of what the story is about, and maybe some ideas of locations that the game will take place into. So me and a couple of other concept artists, we just created those really detailed images of those areas to start conversations, to see if that's the correct lighting we want to use, how it's gonna react, how it's gonna actually cope with the mood of the specific location, like how it's gonna support or distract you from the emotions of the specific part of the story and all that. And once we had the brief, like a good idea of what the story arc is, where are the highs and where are the lows, and how to use colors and lighting to support it. Once we had that, we use it in our advantage to actually create these beautiful pieces, and then have the environment team to something to relate to.
Now, obviously, The Last of Us is one of your most recent projects that you've worked on, but you do have a long list of wonderful work that you've produced in many different styles. I'd love the opportunity to take a look at some other work that you're proud of and see how you've approached some projects that were different from this one.
Yeah, sure. Here's one project that unfortunately got canceled, but it's absolutely different style and way of thinking. That's The Legend of Tembo. I was supposed to be an animation feature done with Digital Domain, and Aaron Blaise, the guy who's directing Brother Bird, was the director on this project. So I met Aaron in 2011 to start chatting about this project, and that was actually an interesting thing because never in my time I was actually doing this kind of work for money. Like I usually focus all of my image, all of my style and energy into creating things that are accurate in terms of light and realism. This, for instance, is a way different thing because once you get into animation field, I'm not an expert, but once you get there, you have to think about some different things than just lighting and realism and design of things. You focus more on story, color, and shapes, and how those things connect together. So there are a couple of examples of things I did for this project. The way I was working here is mostly paint with support of texture to get this extra detail, but I had to almost always starting with 2D and only using brushes. So a couple of frames from the film. I had an opportunity to actually work on the cool stuff, if you could put it that way, because I know it's like with the games. Like once you start the game, once you start producing stuff, it's always the same structure where it's pre-production, where you just come up with ideas, production where you just do the grind work, and then post-production where you just keep putting things together and making sure that everything works tightly. So on this project, we only almost had, throughout the entire time, we only almost had just pre-production. So I could just do keyframes of interesting story moments. And then towards the end, I had only just a few production work pieces where I was just actually set dressing with the production designer some of the areas that were in the film. And I was like working together with 3D artists, figuring out what's where and how this is going to work in the story and how the camera is going to operate in those areas, what to build and what should be in the frame of the camera and all that. So yeah, that's just a couple more examples of work from the film.
What I enjoy in looking at these pieces, particularly after looking at your pieces from The Last of Us, is that in spite of the vast difference in the style, your understanding of color and lighting come through in a similar way in both pieces. So my question would be, when you're approaching this different style, you're approaching the lighting, you're approaching the color in a different way, how do you use those similar tools between the two styles to approach something completely differently?
Well, I mean, that's the thing I was talking about just moments before,
Yeah.
where just because I started in digital media, I had some experience of drawing, so I could use that skill to develop it in the digital media. Uh, I was using a lot of photo references to start with, and I was not just blandly putting, textures and slapping them across the image and see what's going to happen. It's just studying those images, or later on looking at actual world, like, hello, there's cool stuff outside outside the window too. So using that and observing how light is reacting on surfaces, how it's bouncing, how the shadows work depending on different time of day, how much softer the shadows become the closer you get to a sunset, or even just a simple thing when you have like a late afternoon or sunset scenario, you stand on like a grass field or on the ground and you look at your shadow, it's pretty sharp, but then the shadow of the tree that is behind you is softer. That's because of the distance between the object that is casting shadow to a ground that the shadow is cast on. And just realizing it's a very simple thing if you think about it, but most of the time you don't think about it. It's just like you take it for granted. It's there, it's normal, and you never put any attention into it. So, studying photos and looking around and working and taking photos myself, that just started giving me a lot of ideas of how to think about light and how to approach my concepts with that knowledge.
And I think that's very cool to hear that even with such a stylized image, it's still very important to understand the world around you and the way things look and the way things like light, shapes, and color work, regardless of what you're working on.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I totally envy a lot of those guys who work in animation and those concept artists that work in animation, especially like Nathan Fox, for example, that works at DreamWorks. That guy is just amazing in terms of light, like how well he understands light. And it's just something I'm thinking like, it would be so nice to be zombie in his brain and get all the knowledge out of it. That doesn't work like that scientifically, I know, but just dreaming of becoming better at all costs.
Now, your portfolio is very broad. Are there any particular images that you have that you're most proud of?
Yeah, sure. Let me just open it up. I mean, that image is one of the images that I'm most proud of, I guess, in terms of environments. This image is about 90% 3D, actually. The way I approached this was to create this entire environment in Modo. And what I was trying to do is I was actually approaching it in a way like, okay, I don't use 3D too much. I would like to use it more because it's a perfect tool. Because when I look at a work of Ben Proctor or Steve Berg, I'm so jealous that they're doing their concept in 3D, and it's so awesome. So I figured like, okay, what should I do to to get there, and how much time it's gonna take me, and how to get my own stamp on the image that everyone that will look at it will see like, okay, I think that image belongs to that guy. So that's how I started. I started learning 3D, spending much more time on it, and I started building this map, this image from scratch in Modo. So things like, for example, the grid that is, the grid here on the sides, all of the objects and lighting this is all 3D. There was a lot of time spent. I'm sure if I was like a professional 3D artist, this would take me like maybe a day or two. I was learning. It took me 2 weeks to create this. But obviously, during the free time, because I had to split my hours to work as well. But once I created and rendered it, I was pretty much 90% there. The only thing that is not 3D in this image are the hues here and those little weird corner elements like that one and those bags here on the side. And everything else is 3D. What I did just to get like maximum realism, I started adding those rivets and small elements as a texture detail. And it just that took me about, I don't know, maybe 2-3 hours to actually get from the raw render to this final image. Another one, which is not painted, it's 3D as well, is this guy, which again is probably 95% 3D. And it's built in Modo. It's based on Scott Robertson tutorials and examples of 3D Modo replicators. He was doing a lot of work with this system of replicators in a 3D program, where you just build a small pieces of like a small 3D pieces, and then you use them to populate randomly across the 3D model. So the base model of that guy is just a female base character. From what is painted is the helmet that's like a mix of two helicopter pilot helmets, I think. And then there's a render, a sphere render from 3D from Modo with the environment map of a hangar, which is giving the visor impression, and all the flat surfaces like on the breast and shoulder pads, and some of the cables are from photos. And then I've put just some photo textures on top of it, just to get like this dirt on the lens, and maybe some suggestion that it's just like a photo, like it's seen through the camera visor, for example. So we have those like straight lines and some halo of film on the sides. And that's pretty much it. That's getting the cool shapes in Modo, just cool shapes from the randomness of 3D replicators was the most challenging part because it's very unpredictable. But just finishing this piece in Photoshop was like really fast, like maybe an hour or two.
Now we have many attendees here who have been asking questions, and one that's really stuck out to me is that there are so many concept artists that are already into the industry, like yourself, that are incredibly talented and do amazing work. And there are many that are just starting out, that are just trying to get into the industry. They would like some advice with what they can do to make themselves better, fit their skills towards what is being looked for, particularly with so much competition from talented artists like yourself.
Sure. I'll break it down into a practice, like how much time you spend on your work and how social you are. So from the practice point of view, these days you can find tons of reference tutorials, seminars, DVDs, and everything that will just get you into how to use tools like Photoshop 3D or ZBrush or all of that. And you can learn really fast from that. And then just to get to the point where your work actually looks good and you start making money out of it is just, how many hours you're going to spend and how serious you're about doing art. I mean, it's simple as that. The more hours you spend, the better you get. It's like Lance Armstrong or Kobe Bryant. Those guys were, workaholics in terms of how much time they spent, working out and doing their stuff. They wouldn't ever become so good if not the amount of training they were going through to get there. And I think it applies to every single job you're doing. Like, the more you're doing, the better you get. And, publish your work in forums, publish your work on Facebook, and people will start commenting. And then, the other part is just network. Meet with people that actually work in the industry and just, be cool, be a normal person, and, be social. And you will just get there from that. I mean, I can tell you that in the industry, at least half of the work you're going to ever get is from the network you make, if not more. It's just, there's so many artists out there and so much work to look at. If you just go on CG Hub, there's just tons of work and tons of amazing work. But a potential client will look at it. It's like, okay, it looks great. I probably could use it in my game or film or my book cover. But then he'll think about things like, how reliable is that person? How fast he works? If it's a cool guy to work with, how does he take the criticism? If I ask him to change something in the image, is he gonna do it fast, or is he gonna do it slow, or is he gonna do it at all? And clients think about creating something that will look cool in their product or look awesome in their product, but not at all costs. They want to have someone that is reliable, that they can trust. And obviously, if you get a client to ask his artist that he worked with, hey, who else would you recommend? And they will say, okay, try this guy. And then obviously they will pick that guy first instead of going on forums and looking at work that might be awesome. But if there's no trust that they could build first with those guys.
One thing that, from talking today, that seems to have been a theme with your work is trying new approaches, using different tools, and not being afraid to approach your piece from many different directions. What kind of advice do you have for artists that are learning new tools? What are some approaches that they should start taking, and what are some new things they should start trying with their pieces so that they aren't pigeonholing themselves or limiting what they could fully become as a concept artist?
It's a tough question, actually. I feel like you guys, I myself focus on something that I feel comfortable with, but just every now and then I would just try to get out of the comfort zone and just force myself to do something else. Before I started using 3D in any of my works, I was feeling comfortable just firing up Photoshop and just creating everything from scratch, or using textures or photos or whatever, the usual business. And all of my works looked the same all the time. And I felt like I wasn't progressing enough. I wasn't getting to a point where I felt more happy or amazed of, if doing something new. And I looked at the several pieces that I've done over a certain period of time, and all of them were on the same quality and the same amount of detail and all that. So then I looked at, for example, I've mentioned before, portfolio of Ben Proctor or Steve Berg, and like, holy shit, like those guys are so amazing, and they do it in a totally different way. And if I was supposed to do that, Like, there's no way I can do that. But wait, maybe there is. Like, let's try getting into 3D. It's gonna suck. It's gonna be painful. It's gonna take a couple of months to actually produce anything out of it. But once you start, and then look like those couple of months back, you will not regret it. Because if you just postpone that thing, like, oh, maybe I'll try later, and half a year later you're in the same spot. You're not doing anything new. And as I said, like, there's just so much tutorials and material that you can use to learn the software. And the software itself is just becoming so much easier to use too. Like, I remember when I was starting with 3D in 2003, it was just horrible. Like, there was no way for me at that point to understand how to create those high quality images. And now it's just like you fire up Moto and it's just so much easier, for example.
Well, Maciej, I have to say it's been a real pleasure speaking with you today, and I'd really like to thank you on behalf of CGMA and on behalf of the attendees that we have here. It's really been an eye-opening interview. I've enjoyed it immensely, getting to see a little bit of the thought behind the processes that you use for your concept art and also for the work that you did for Last of Us. It's really beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing it with us today.
Thanks, man. And thanks to the rest of you guys. I'm really happy to see so many attendees listening to this. It's the actually first time I'm talking live with more than one or two persons. So just bear in mind that, it could have been better if I was awesome speaker like Shadi, for example.
Well, Maciej had mentioned that to us today, that this was his first time doing anything and like this. And I think that you've done an excellent job, and I appreciate it. And I'm sure the attendees agree, particularly with the response that we've received today. I'm sure that they do. Before we close this session, I did want to remind everyone that registration for CGMA courses is currently open, so please visit cgma2dacademy.com to view current course offerings and sign up for the class or classes that best fit your needs. Again, Interview with the Masters is an ongoing series. Keep an eye on our website for more information and more interviews to come. Again, Maciej, thank you so much, and thank you to everyone joining us today. I wish you all a pleasant afternoon, depending on where you are in the world, perhaps evening or morning. And thank you again, Maciej, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Or Maciej, I'm sorry, I said it the wrong way.
No worries. No worries at all.